right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for spending your afternoon going through this training with me. We are going to dive into the world of DMAC. Now, I know you guys as teachers have used DMAC over and over and over and over again. We use it pretty regular. It is a really amazing system that allows us to track a lot of data and allows us to kind of dive into how our students are doing on the TEKS, what they're understanding, what they're not understanding, and how they perform on a tested platform. We are going to be going through quite a bit of information. We're going to be looking at this chart that we have here up on the screen. I also gave you guys a copy of this. We're going to walk through this together and just dive into some of the data and figure out how can we break down this data. So for those of you that have been using DMAC for a while, I know that you're familiar with the amount of reports that you can draw on DMAC. There is so much information. To avoid information overload, we're going to go through a couple of those things and just kind of break down what their uses are, what they can be done, or what you can use them for in your classroom, and how they can benefit your students in the long run. For our new teachers that are joining us new this school year and have not really worked with DMAC before, or if you're from another campus that didn't have DMAC, welcome. DMAC is awesome. We love using the different reports. They have a lot of useful information for us. So I'm super excited to get you guys started on your journey into DMAC for those that are brand new to it. So let's look at what our goals are for using DMAC and why we use it so heavily on all of our tests. All right, so our goal, why do we collect data? Why do we harp so much? Why do you hear me mention data in every single meeting that we have for the most part whenever it's PLCs and things like that? Okay, the important thing about data is how we use it. So the analysis part is the most important part. We can collect as much data as we want, but unless we analyze it and do something with it, it is useless. So our goal, the goal and purpose of data analysis is to prevent learning gaps and improve student comprehension and performance on tested TEKS. If problem areas are pinpointed, we can better prevent more learning gaps and begin closing the existing gaps. Okay, so that's that little section right up here if you're reading along with me. Our main goal is to do what's best for the students. So if we notice that our students are falling behind, if we notice that they are not mastering this TEK and we've taught it this way, that way, and another way, there's something that we need to go back in and close a gap on. So this is what we're going to use a lot of the DMAC reports for. All right, so all of these reports that we have in this little semicircle can be accessed through your TEKS score instructional reports when you go to DMAC. So when you log in, you've got all the different things. You've got your T-test, your T-pass, all that kind of stuff. You're going to go to TEKS score. This is where you are going to see all of these reports that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so in TEKS score, our first one is performance summary. So when you go through TEKS score, you're going to click on local assessment. You're going to click on the button that says reports up in the top. And then you are going to click on instructional. This is going to take you to a window with a bunch of check boxes. You're going to have all the tests that you have attached to your name in DMAC on the other side. So what you're going to do is you're going to pick the test that you want, and then you are going to pick the report that you want. And you can choose to break it down class by class, or you can just look at all of your students as a whole, organized by alpha. Okay. So our first one, performance summary. This is great for when you want to look at whole group performance. This is going to tell you, how did your classes do as a whole? What did first period do differently than third period? If third period had a 50% pass rate and first period had a 80% pass rate, this will be a real quick look over. Okay, this class did better, this class did worse. So this will help you kind of figure out what class do you need to pinpoint, what area or what class struggled the most, and what class succeeded the most. All right, on this one, it again looks at the class as a whole. You can have a quick glance of it if you are just trying to figure out, where do I need to go back? How did the students do? How did my kids do on this? This is a great one for it. Again, this is mainly for whole group, so it is not something that you necessarily have to have that you can necessarily pull a lot of information for individual students on. Okay, the next one we're looking at student quintile. So this is good for our individual students. We can break it down into groups based on performance. So this will break it down if Jimmy, Sally, Sue, and Jenny were in the first quintile. They did really, 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 really bad on this one TEK. We can sit with a small group of those particular students and figure out, we can kill and drill, we can go over and over and over on that particular TEK and see if they just need a little bit more instruction on it. We can pinpoint if there is a vocabulary learning gap. We can pinpoint if they maybe didn't learn something that we needed to have before we taught this TEK. So student quintile breaks down their students just into their quintiles. This is a great way to ability group your kids. So if you're wanting to do some stations, you can do stations based off of the previous test or whatever test it is that you're looking at, and use this student quintile to help you break those students into those ability groups. So if you do your stations like that, that's awesome. If not, that's okay too, but maybe go ahead and give that a try. I think that's a great strategy to help group our students to work with the peers that they are on level with. This is also a good tool if you want to do a high, medium, and low student together in your group. So if you're wanting to mix up how you're doing your student grouping in class, this would be a great one to look at, because you can pull a student from quintile 1, 2, and 3, and that's a group. You can also pull all students from quintile 1, all students from quintile 2, quintile 3, and so forth. Okay. Our next one, again, is geared towards our individual students. So it's our targeted skills. This is going to give you a long list of the students that'll go alphabetically. You can again do it by class, or you can do it by your whole student body. So if you have 5 classes of ELA and 2 classes of advanced ELA, you can group it with your whole entire advanced ELA class, or you can break it down into your individual classes, advanced 1, advanced 2, and then same thing for your regular on-level ELA classes. You could do on level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, or you can do all 5 of them as a whole. It's entirely up to you what you're looking at, however it makes sense in your brain. I know for me, when I was a teacher, I preferred to do it by class, and I would also print a copy just for my records of them in order alphabetically with all of my classes, all of my students, just because I like to see how my students would grow as a whole student body and how my students would grow individually in the class. So that's, again, preference on your side, whichever you prefer. If you like to have data tracker binders like I did when I was a teacher, that is perfectly fine. This is a great thing to keep in that particular binder. When you look at their responses, this is going to tell you, okay, question 1 asked about TEK 5F, and Jimmy got that one wrong. But question number 8 also asked about TEK 5F, and he got that one right. So you can look at each individual question and see what TEK that question was covering, what TEK that question focused on. If we notice that little Jimmy is struggling on 3 out of the 5 TEK 5F questions, maybe it was just, that was a tough question, maybe he kind of gets it. We can kind of start to gauge how this student is understanding that particular TEK. There's another report that we're going to look at here in just a minute that will do that same kind of thing, but this is a great way to kind of put us side by side. Okay, all of these students, little Jimmy, every test that we've taken, he has struggled on TEK 5F, and I can see that on this particular targeted skill. So I know what skill I need to target whenever I pull little Jimmy to small group. So again, this is a fantastic way to put a small group together. It shows you what skills, and it's in the name, that our students need to target, what they need to work on, what they're still struggling with, what they're doing great on. Okay, so we can also use this as a way to praise our students. If we see that they were struggling on this targeted skill on our first unit test, but on the 3rd unit test, they really stepped it up and they were able to nail all of that particular TEK. We can show them, hey, look, this is where you were, and this is where you are. We can use it as a praising method. A lot of times our students are so worried about getting the wrong answer that sometimes using some of these reports, letting them see on paper, hey, this is what you did at the first, and this is where you're at, will help them kind of boost their confidence a little bit in their test-taking ability. Okay, our next one I'm going to move on to is our item analysis. Again, this is fantastic for whole group. Okay, so we've talked about 2 that were individual student-based and 1 that is whole group so far. This is our second whole group one. This one shows us, and this one is, again, right here on your handout, it shows us the percentage of students and how they answered each question. So it shows you on question number 1, 58% of your students picked A, a percentage picked B, a percentage picked C, and a percentage picked D. So it breaks it down into what percentage of your students picked each answer choice. This is a great way to see if they're just guessing, or if you see a common thread. So if a majority of them picked C and C was the incorrect answer, this is a great way to see, okay, was there something in the teaching? Was there something in the wording of the question? What made all of these students decide that C was the correct answer when it was actually wrong? You can also see if your percentage is pretty evenly spread out between A, B, C, and D if your students are guessing. So if they had no idea what to do on that question, or if they just didn't feel like taking a test that day, or if they were tired, or whatever it may have been, for some reason on that question they were guessing. So this is a great way to kind of see what your students are doing on the test and kind of get into the mindset of what were they thinking, how were they thinking. If we notice that there is a question or an answer choice that they chose and it was not the correct answer choice, but a majority of them picked it, we can start looking at that question and say, I wonder why my students picked that one. What word, what phrase, what thing helped or made them think that this was the correct answer. All right, it also shows areas where it gives you a little chart where it'll tell you the mastery of this particular question on the test. So it goes question by question. Again, it's broken down by TEK, and it's also broken down by question. So if you see, it'll give you a little graph. It'll see a red bar. That means that they are really struggling with it. They really need some help. They did not do well on this question. If it's kind of an orangey yellow color, that means that they're getting there, but they aren't quite at mastery yet. And if it's green, of course, that means, hey, we got it. We're in a good spot. All right, moving on to the next one. It is another whole group report that is really helpful if you want to look at your students as a whole and not individually. That is our SE performance. I love the SE performance one because it shows the frequency of questions that were used on that TEK. So if TEK 5F was questioned 5 times and that was 25% of your test, okay, it shows you how your students do on the thing that is questioned most heavily on the test. That's really, really useful, especially when we start breaking down what the STAR test did last year. We can see, all right, we know that this TEK was questioned 48% of the time or something like that on our STAR test. We need to make sure that our tests that we give in DMAC mirror that so that we can maybe have a better chance of doing better on that TEK next year on our STAR test. It also has another visual. The visuals in DMAC are great. They have lots of charts. They are very, very easy to follow. They have lots of colors that you can look at, and it just makes it a lot simpler whenever you're looking at so much data. I know a lot of times whenever we look in things like DMAC and all these different data tracking areas that there is so much information that it's like an information overload. DMAC does a great job, if you find the right report, if you find the reports that you like, of breaking that into something a little bit simpler. All right, our final one that we're going to look at is our SE tutorial. It's very similar to our performance, but this one breaks the students into quintile based on that TEK. So it'll give you another list of the students that performed from 0 to 25% or 0 to 30% or whatever you have your quintile set to. It'll show you that list of students and how they did on each TEK. Again, it is based on the TEK, not necessarily the question. So if we see that a majority of our students performed really, really well on 5F, we'll have a smaller 0 to 33% quintile. We'll have a larger 70 to 100 quintile, depending on what, again, you have your quintile set to. All right, this is a lot of information. These are my go-to. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 really awesome reports that focus on the whole group and focus on the individual student. We did mention 3 that were about the individual student. We mentioned 3 that were whole group. How you use those is up to you. I highly encourage you to spend some time maybe on conference one day and just kind of tool around in DMAC and see which reports work best for you. I would start with these. These are the ones that I used a lot whenever I was a teacher, and I continue to use now as a principal when I'm looking at student testing data. If you ever have any questions, if you need some help with figuring out all the world of DMAC, I am your go-to person. I love DMAC. I spent a lot of time as an English teacher when I taught in 7th grade English, just tooling around the different reports and figuring out which one worked best for me. A lot of it's just clicking around in DMAC. You won't break anything, I promise, and if you do break something, I can fix it. So feel free to ask any questions that you have. If you need to schedule a time with me where we can sit down and go through all these reports individually and just see which one works best for you, I'd be happy to do it. All right, thank you guys so much for your time and for paying attention, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.